The voters have spoken, and they're fed up with the way Barack Obama is running the country. But all the hot-button issues of last Tuesday will continue to shape the 2016 presidential election. Terrorism, Ebola, foreign policy, and you can bet our enemies will take advantage of this president before a new and hopefully stronger president takes office in 2017. With me now, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Good evening, Ambassador. What does this victory mean for the president's foreign policy?
Well, I think one of the important issues in this election, as you just said, was the feeling on the part of many Americans across the country that the president's not doing the job he should be doing to provide their security, whether it's against terrorism, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, border security, or Ebola. And these issues played, I think, very important roles in some key elections. Tom Cotton in Arkansas, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Tom Tillis in North Carolina. But I think the feeling was general across the country, and it was reflective of the view that the president is a poor leader. So I think over the next 2 years, the issues are going to continue to mount. And as you just said, I think this is going to be a significant issue in the 2016 elections, contrary to the conventional political wisdom of just 6 or 8 months ago.
Well, you know what's interesting is that, this week we heard about the president and the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, are their pen pals now. And what amazes me and what I can't seem to grasp is what do we have in common with Iran that we need to make all of these concessions? And I was reading something today, Ambassador. It says in the beginning of the year, this administration had a ceiling at 500 centrifuges, and now we're between 4,000 and 6,000, raising the numbers so that they can enrich their uranium. Why?
Yeah, well, I don't get it either. I think the president badly misunderstands the nature of the regime in Iran. It is extraordinarily anti-American. Its philosophy is a philosophy of religious fanaticism, and essentially it's a military government at this point. They're determined to get nuclear weapons. They've been after them for 30 years, and they sense in the president a weak leader who is desperate for a deal for his own ideological and political reasons. The only reason they haven't signed something that would be very advantageous to Iran already is they see they can get more concessions out of him. And as you point out, now sending his 4th letter to the supreme leader, that just tells them in Tehran there's more to get here. Well,
and the amazing part is, I mean, if the United States believes that we need to give concessions to Iran so they fight with the Sunni against the Sunni extremists, I mean, they're Alawites and Shiites. They're going to fight with them anyway.
Well, I think that the really common thread, though, is that they both hate the United States. And in the Middle East, it's very easy to find common ground in that respect. So the whole notion that the president's proceeding on is wrong. And the fact is, he's just simply not paying enough attention to ISIS to begin with. The main threat remains Iran, so the president loses on both scores. He's not dealing with Iran's nuclear weapons program or its continued support for terrorism, and he's certainly not dealing with ISIS.
And what about what's going on now in Iraq? I mean, there's talk of mission creep, another 1,500 troops going there. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I'm concerned that the president's putting Americans in harm's way with no strategy whatever. The fact is, I wouldn't do anything to buttress the government in Baghdad today. It's effectively just a satellite of Iran. To fight ISIS in Iraq, we need the Sunnis of the western part of the country that were part of our surge in 2006 and 7 and 8. We need the Kurds, and we need to bring in other Arab states as well. Strengthening what's left of the government of Iraq is the wrong way to go. And there's no evidence it would work even if we put more effort into it.
All right, Ambassador John Bolton, stay with us for another minute while we move on to another developing story. Justice has talked about the dangers that face the United States power grid for months. Now, in addition to powerful solar flares of late, the strongest in decades, that have the potential to wipe out our grid, now comes word that the Russians may have hacked into our grid system years ago and left a Trojan horse software in that critical infrastructure. Department of Homeland Security believes that Russian-sponsored hackers planted the programs which are so advanced the user can actually take control using only a computer or a smartphone. With me now is cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright. Good evening, Morgan. Thanks for being with us. What is this cyber virus and how destructive is it?
Look, the Russians used to build nuclear weapons. In fact, they still do. So these are pretty smart people. What it is, it's malware. It's software that has been designed to wreak havoc, to cause destruction, to disrupt things. And the reason it was planted years ago is while we were focusing on China and focusing on all the other issues in the world, the Russians kept building things because where we're most vulnerable, as you pointed out, is our critical infrastructure, our energy grid, our water, our utilities, our communications. If you can disrupt those, then they go do something like going to Crimea or the Ukraine. And then pretty soon, while our attentions are focused on that, we have to also deal with the cyber event here at home. All
right. And it's my understanding, Morgan, that this was put there in 2011.
Yes.
Is there any way that we can disarm this malware?
Look, it is so pervasive throughout our entire infrastructure right now. This is the equivalent of Where's Waldo with software. You might find, and because it was deployed now in Europe on some telecommunications at NATO and other places, so we do have the advantage of understanding its command and control structure, how it's used, and so now we're able to use that to find it in our systems. But the problem is, Judge, I mean, the critical infrastructure, 85% is owned by the private industry, private sector. There are so many places out there. Where do you start? I mean, we can start, we can try and do it, but boy, this will go on and on for years before we can fully find it and remediate it.
And you know, given the fact that, and Justice has fought and argued for many months now that these some of these local power companies need to, you know, make the grid stronger, and we can't even get them to do that. Have we shared this information with them? Is this the kind of information that they know about, and can they do anything, assuming they would want to?
Sure, DHS, and I will give them credit, they've done a lot more outreach on sharing information and intelligence to the extent they can. They have what they call the Information Sharing Analysis Centers, the ISACs, that also share information between all the different critical infrastructures. So when this was learned in Europe, they started taking some of the indicators, what the malware looked like, how you could detect it, and they started sharing this with the private sector. But Judge, to your point, a lot of these folks don't have the resources, they don't have the wherewithal to fully defend themselves. Right. And so even though the big companies might do it, if you get a few smaller guys, this infection, this malware starts all over again, and we're right back to where we started.
All right, I'm going to go to Ambassador Bolton now. Ambassador, you know, are we doing the same thing to Russia? I mean, is this how the game is played? Are we being naive here?
Well, I wish I could say we were. And of course, this is all classified, or at least I hope it stays classified if we are. But by and large, I think the United States remains behind both Russia and China and other rogue states like North Korea that are doing cyber warfare. Conceptually, I don't think we understand it like we understand conventional warfare. I think we've got a lot of catching up to do and a lot of educating, as your guest was saying, both in the government and the private sector.
And Ambassador, if we'd known about this since 2011, and it appears that this is just coming out now, I mean, wouldn't the government have been trying to eliminate this malware?
Well, I think we're definitely making a lot of progress in defense against cyber warfare, but this is a conceptual question. What is a couple of graduate students playing around? What constitutes espionage? What constitutes active clandestine activity? What constitutes an act of war in the cyber world? And does leaving malware behind that can be exploited later, is that an act of war now, or is it only an act of war when they finally trigger it? We're not ready on those grounds, and we've got a long way to catch up. And let me just say, even if the government is working hard, the private sector is much more vulnerable.
Oh, no question. Ambassador John Bolton and Morgan Wright, thanks so much for being with us.
You bet, Judge.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. And coming up, Tuesday's Veterans Day. Now some